On a prosperous farm, where the green contrasts with the misery of the surroundings, a 7-year-old girl sneaks among the dairy cows, trying to get milk for her hungry 3-year-old little brother. When the millionaire farmer catches her stealing from his property, he explodes in fury and grabs a wooden stick, determined to publicly punish the desperate child. The girl, terrified, begs for mercy while explaining that the milk was for her brother, who cries from hunger at home. But when the rich man is about to strike the blow, an entire herd of horses comes galloping in his direction. What these brave animals do next is unbelievable. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The morning dew still clung to the leaves as Haley's small bare feet touched the cool earth of the ranch. At 7 years old, her large dark eyes held a premature wisdom no child should possess. The dented tin pail trembled in her thin hands as she slipped between the shadows, each step calculated with the precision of one who knows danger intimately. The contrast was brutal and impossible to ignore. On one side, verdant pastures stretched out like an emerald sea, dotted with well-fed dairy cows chewing placidly under the pink-tinged dawn sky. On the other, beyond the fence that marked the prosperous property's edge, small, dilapidated wooden houses sheltered entire families who fought a daily battle against the hunger that gnawed at their insides like a wild animal. Haley paused. For a moment, watching the cows move slowly through the field, her empty stomach rumbled, a protest against 3 days without a decent meal. But it wasn't for herself that she was here. In the small shack where she lived with her 3-year-old, brother Leo was crying incessantly, his tears drying on his blue-eyed face as he begged for food she didn't have. The girl took a deep breath, smelling the sweet scent of grass mixed with the strong aroma of the animals. Her small hands gripped the pail tighter, as if the object itself could lend her the courage for what she was about to do. She knew she was trespassing, knew she could be caught, but the image of her starving little brother burned in her mind like a branding iron. With cautious movements, Haley approached a spotted cow grazing a little apart from the others. The animal lifted its head, its large, gentle eyes fixing on the girl without alarm. It was as if it could sense the desperation emanating from the frail child, recognizing in her gaze the same vulnerability it sometimes saw in newborn calves. Haley slowly extended a hand, allowing the cow to sniff her fingers before she positioned herself beside the animal. Her trembling hands found the swollen udders, and she began to milk with the clumsy technique of someone who had learned by watching from afar. Warm milk streamed into the pail, each drop a renewed hope to quell little Leo's hunger. The rhythmic sound of the milk hitting the tin was muffled by the thumping of Haley's own heart. Her ears were alert for any sound that might signal someone's approach, but the ranch seemed immersed in the morning silence that precedes the full awakening of the day. As she worked, Haley didn't notice the imposing figure watching from a distance. Josiah Vance, owner of the most prosperous ranch in the county, stood on the porch of his large main house, his fists clenched as he watched what he considered a brazen invasion of his property. At 52, the man had built his empire with an iron fist, firmly believing that compassion was a synonym for weakness. His eyes narrowed as he observed the girl's movements. To him, it didn't matter that she was just a hungry child trying to feed a younger sibling. In his mind, distorted by greed and power, the girl was stealing what was rightfully his. And that was intolerable. Josiah's face twisted into a mask of pure rage when he saw Haley lift the pail, now holding a reasonable amount of milk. The man descended the porch steps with heavy footfalls, his decision already made. No one, absolutely no one, would mess with what was his without paying a steep price for their audacity. Haley finished milking and was preparing to leave when she heard the approaching steps. Her heart leapt into her throat and she knew instantly. She had been discovered. Time seemed to freeze as Haley heard the heavy footfalls draw near. Her fingers tightened on the tin pail with such force that her knuckles turned white, and she turned slowly, already knowing she would have to face the storm that had formed on the horizon of her life. Josiah Vance emerged from between the cows, like a threatening shadow, his tall, robust figure blocking the golden light of the rising sun. His small, piercing eyes glittered with a fury that made Haley tremble like a leaf in the wind. The man wore expensive clothes that contrasted brutally, with the dirty rags covering the girl's thin body. So this is how you people repay the generosity of those who work honestly? Josiah's voice boomed across the fields, charged with an indignation that seemed wildly disproportionate to the crime. Trespassing on my property like thieves, stealing what's mine by right. Haley backed away instinctively, but her bare feet hit the barbed wire fence behind her. She was cornered, with only the pail of milk between her and the powerful man's fury. Tears began to well in her eyes, but there was something in them that wasn't just fear. It was the fierce determination of a girl who had no other choice. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "I didn't mean any harm. It's just my little brother. He's so hungry and I didn't know what else to do." Her words tumbled out in short, broken bursts, as if she feared the man wouldn't let her finish. Josiah took a step forward, his shadow completely swallowing the girl. "Hungry?" he laughed, but it was a harsh, humorless sound. "Hunger is what you people deserve for not working hard enough. My own father went hungry as a boy, and that's what made him strong, what taught him the value of $1. The surrounding cows began to shift uneasily, sensing the tension in the air. One of them, the same one Haley had milked, let out a low moo, as if trying to draw attention to the situation. Others slowly drew closer, forming a loose circle around the unfolding scene. "My brother is only 3, Haley tried to explain, her voice growing louder as her desperation mounted. "He cries all the time because he has nothing to eat. I thought if it was just a little milk, it wouldn't make a difference to you, sir." Josiah's face turned red with anger. To him, the girl's sincerity was just more proof of the insolence of the poor. "Wouldn't make a difference?" he bellowed. "Every drop of this milk is worth money. Every drop represents my work, my investment, my dedication." He advanced another step, and Haley shrank against the fence, feeling the barbs prick her back through her thin shirt. The pail of milk trembled in her hands, a few drops spilling onto the dry ground. "You people think you can just take what belongs to others?" Josiah continued, his voice rising. "That you can invade my property and steal what I've built with years of sweat?" It was then that something unexpected happened. The cows, which had been gradually approaching, began to move more deliberately. They positioned themselves in a semicircle, not exactly between Haley and Josiah, but in a way that seemed to shield the girl. Josiah stopped, surprised by the animals' behavior. In all his years as a rancher, he had never seen his cows act this way. They stood there, motionless, but their presence was undeniably protective. "Even the animals know you don't belong here," he muttered, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. Something about the situation unnerved him, though he couldn't pinpoint what. Haley seized the momentary distraction to take a step sideways, trying to find an escape route. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure Josiah could hear it. The milk in the pail was all she had to offer her little brother, and the thought of losing it made her desperate. "Don't even think about running," Josiah snarled, his attention snapping back to her. "You're going to learn today that actions have consequences." Josiah reached for Haley, his thick fingers opening like talons ready to grab her. Panic shot through the girl's veins like liquid fire, and her survival instinct overrode any rational thought. With a quick, desperate move, she ducked and rolled under the wire fence, scraping her arms on the metal barbs. "Get back here, right now!" roared Josiah, his voice echoing across the fields like the bellow of an enraged bull. He tried to get through the fence himself, but his bulk and his good clothes hindered him, giving Haley a few precious seconds of a head start. The girl ran as she had never run in her life, her small feet flying over the uneven ground. The tin pail swung violently in her hands, spilling precious drops of milk along the way, but she couldn't stop to worry about it. Every lost drop was like a dagger to her heart, but losing it all would be even worse. Behind her, Josiah finally managed to get through the fence, tearing his expensive shirt in the process. His breath was already coming in heavy gasps, but rage fueled him. "Nobody steals from Josiah Vance and gets away with it," he shouted, though Haley was already pulling away. What neither of them expected was what happened next. The cows, having watched the entire scene, began to move. It wasn't a random or casual movement. There was purpose in their steps. They spread out across the field, some blocking Josiah's path, others positioning themselves to create natural obstacles. A large, spotted cow placed itself directly in the rancher's way, mooing loudly and shaking its head. Josiah tried to go around it, but the animal moved to block his path again. It was as if the cows had developed a collective will to protect the girl who had been gentle with them. "Get out of the way, you useless beasts!" Josiah yelled, shoving the animals with unnecessary force. But the cows were not intimidated. On the contrary, more of them joined the group, creating a living barrier between the man and his prey. Haley, breathless and with her heart pounding in her chest, managed to reach the dirt road that separated the ranch from the cluster of humble shacks where she lived. She turned for a moment and saw the surreal scene. Josiah struggling against his own cows, which seemed determined not to let him pass. Tears of relief and gratitude welled in her eyes. She didn't understand why the animals were helping her, but she felt a deep connection to these gentle creatures who had recognized her need. "Thank you," she whispered, even though she knew they couldn't hear her. Running through the dusty lanes of the small settlement, Haley passed neighbors who watched her with curiosity and concern. Miss Connie, an elderly woman who lived in the shack next to hers, waved from her window. "Haley, child, what happened? Are you all right?" But Haley didn't stop to answer. Her only thought was to get home and give the milk to Leo before what little was left in the pail soured or spilled completely. Her legs were beginning to tremble with exhaustion and adrenaline, but she forced herself to keep going. The small, wooden shack appeared before her like an oasis in the desert. Haley pushed the door open with her shoulder and went inside, finding Leo sitting on the dirt floor, his blue eyes red from crying. When he saw his sister, he held out his thin little arms to her. "Haley," he cried out, "I'm hungry, Haley. It hurts so bad." Haley knelt beside her little brother, her own tears mingling with his. "I know, my love, I know it hurts, but look what I brought for you." She held up the pail, showing him the milk she had managed to save during her desperate flight. Leo's eyes lit up like stars in the night sky. Haley helped him drink the warm milk, each gulp met with sighs of relief and gratitude. She knew it wouldn't last long, that in a few hours the hunger would return to torment them, but for now she had managed to give her little brother a moment of peace. As she watched Leo drink, Haley's mind was already at work, planning. She knew she would have to go back to the ranch. There was no other choice. Night fell over the settlement like a heavy blanket, but Haley couldn't sleep. Lying beside Leo on the thin mattress that served as their bed, she listened to her little brother's uneven breathing, punctuated by the low moans he made even in his sleep. The milk had temporarily eased his hunger, but Haley knew it wouldn't be enough for long. When the first rays of sun began to filter through the cracks in the wooden wall, Haley had already made her decision. She rose carefully, trying not to wake Leo, and looked around the nearly empty shack. There was nothing to sell, nothing to trade for food. Her only options were to beg, something her childish pride instinctively rejected, or to return to the ranch. The memory of the cows protecting her was still vivid in her mind. There was something about those animals, a natural kindness that contrasted sharply with their owner's cruelty. Perhaps if she were more careful this time, if she chose a different time, she could go unnoticed. Leo woke as Haley was preparing to leave, his blue eyes, still hazy with sleep, fixed on his sister's determined face. "Haley, going out again?" he asked in a raspy voice. Haley knelt beside him, stroking his tangled blonde hair. "I'm going to get more milk for you, my love. You need to stay here and be a very brave boy, okay? But what if the mean man gets you?" Leo clutched Haley's hand with surprising strength for such a frail child. "I'm scared, Haley." Haley's heart broke at the fear in her little brother's eyes. She wanted to lie, to say that everything would be all right, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she hugged him tightly, feeling his sharp little bones under his pale skin. "I'm scared too," she admitted in a whisper. "But I'm more scared of seeing you hungry. I'll be very careful, I promise." As she walked along the still deserted roads towards the ranch, Haley reflected on her life. Just 6 months ago, she'd had a relatively normal childhood. Her parents, though poor, had managed to provide the basics for the family. Everything changed the night a mysterious fever took first her mother, then her father, in a matter of days. Suddenly, a 7-year-old girl found herself responsible for a 3-year-old brother. The neighbors helped where they could, but they all faced their own hardships. Miss Connie occasionally brought a thin soup or some stale bread, but Haley knew the elderly woman was struggling herself. The ranch appeared before her like a separate world, with its well-maintained fences and verdant fields. Haley stopped at the edge of the road, observing the morning movements of the ranch hands. Men and women headed to their posts, some carrying tools, others driving small tractors. Among them, Haley noticed a couple who caught her eye. The man, tall and lean, had graying hair and a kind face weathered by years of working in the sun. The woman beside him was short and plump, with a warm smile that reached her brown eyes. They spoke in low voices as they walked, and Haley could see the gentleness in their gestures. The man was Arthur, the ranch foreman for over 15 years. His wife, Rose, worked as the cook in the main house, preparing meals for Josiah and on special days for the workers. They had no children of their own, a wound that had never fully healed in their hearts. Haley waited until the workers had dispersed to their tasks before approaching the fence. This time, she chose a different spot, farther from the main house, where a few cows were grazing peacefully. Her heart was pounding, but need was stronger than fear. As she slipped through the wires of the fence, Haley didn't realize that Arthur had noticed her. The foreman, surveying the fields with experienced eyes, saw the thin girl approaching the cows with the same dented tin pail from the day before. Instead of shouting or chasing her, Arthur remained where he was, watching. There was something in the child's determination that touched him deeply. He recognized the desperation in her movements, the same hopelessness he had felt in his own childhood when hunger was a constant companion. Haley approached a young cow grazing by itself. Her hands no longer trembled as much as the day before. Necessity had given her a courage she didn't know she possessed. Arthur watched Haley with growing concern as she neared the young cow. At 55, the foreman had developed a keen instinct for reading people, and something in the girl's posture reminded him of his own difficult childhood. He made a silent decision. He wouldn't interfere, at least not yet. Haley began to milk with more confidence than the day before. The cow, as if recognizing her need, remained calm and cooperative. Warm milk streamed into the tin pail, and for the first time in days, Haley felt a flicker of hope grow in her chest. It was then that the familiar, dreaded voice echoed across the fields. "So the little thief has returned!" Josiah Vance strode towards Haley with determined steps, his face red with indignation. "I thought yesterday's lesson would have been enough, but I see you people never learn." Haley's blood ran cold. She tried to stand up quickly, but her legs trembled so badly she nearly fell. The pail slipped from her grasp, spilling half of tea, the precious milk onto the ground. The sight of the white liquid being absorbed by the dry earth was like a knife to her heart. "No, please," Haley cried, kneeling to try to save what was left. "I need that milk. My little brother is sick." Josiah laughed cruelly. "Sick? And what do I have to do with that? You invade my property, steal from my animals, and you still want me to feel sorry for you?" He moved closer, his shadow completely covering the kneeling girl. Arthur, watching from a distance, felt his chest tighten. His experience with Josiah told him that the boss wouldn't hesitate to hurt a child if it served to set an example. The foreman began to move towards the scene, but he kept a safe distance. "This time, you won't get away," Josiah snarled, reaching out to grab Haley by the arm. "I'm going to teach you and your whole lot of beggars that my property is sacred." Was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. The cows, which had been watching the scene with growing agitation, began to move as one. It wasn't just the individual protection they had shown the day before. Now it was a coordinated, deliberate action. The cow Haley had been milking placed itself directly between the girl and Josiah, mooing loudly and shaking its head threateningly. Other cows quickly joined, forming a solid barrier around Haley. They mooed in chorus, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed across the fields. "What the hell is wrong with these animals?" Josiah shouted, trying to push the cows aside. But they wouldn't budge. On the contrary, more animals kept arriving, until Haley was completely encircled by a living wall of protection. Arthur watched the scene with growing awe. In all his years working with cattle, he had never seen such behavior. It was as if the animals had developed a collective consciousness to protect this vulnerable child. Haley, at the center of the protective circle, looked around with tears. In her eyes, the cows had lowered their large heads towards her, as if trying to comfort her. One even gently licked her hand with its rough tongue in an unexpected gesture of affection. "Get out of the way, you useless beasts!" Josiah bellowed, completely losing control. He picked up a dry branch from the ground and tried to strike the cows, but they just pressed closer together, shielding Haley with their massive bodies. The scene was becoming chaotic when Rose came running from the main house. She had heard the shouting and mooing and had come to investigate. When she saw the situation, her motherly heart immediately went out to the frightened girl at the center of the circle of cows. "Josiah," she cried, arriving breathless. "What is going on here?" "This little thief invaded my property again," Josiah replied, without taking his eyes off the cows blocking his path. "And now the animals have gone crazy." Rose looked at Haley and saw a child who couldn't be more than 7, far too thin, with torn clothes and large eyes full of fear and desperation. Her maternal instinct spoke louder than any consideration of property or rules. "She's just a child," Rose said softly, approaching slowly. "A hungry child." "A thieving child," Josiah retorted. "And if I don't do something now, tomorrow we'll have a dozen of them here." The cows seemed to sense Rose's gentle approach. They shifted slightly, allowing the woman to get closer to Haley. Rose knelt beside the girl, noticing the tears rolling down her dirty cheeks. "What's your name, dear?" Rose asked in a sweet voice. "Haley," the girl whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I just wanted a little milk for my brother." Rose felt her heartbreak. Rose looked into Haley's eyes and saw a reflection of her own childhood. She too had known hunger, the uncertainty of not knowing if there would be food the next day. The difference was that Haley carried this burden at 7, while Rose had had parents to protect her until she was 12, when life had forced her to grow up fast. "Where are your parents, dear?" Rose asked gently, reaching out to touch Haley's thin face. "They went to heaven," Haley answered with the painful simplicity of a child. "They got sick and couldn't stay with me and Leo. Now I'm the one who takes and care of him." Rose's heart clenched even tighter. She looked at Josiah, who was still trying to push the cows away with the branch, his face contorted with rage. "Josiah, she's an orphan. She's taking care of a younger brother." "So what?" he snarled, not looking at Rose. "It's not my problem if their parents were irresponsible. My property is sacred and no one is going to invade what's mine." Arthur finally approached, pretending he had just arrived. "Boss, is everything all right here? I heard a lot of noise." "Everything is far from all right." Josiah turned to his foreman, the branch still in his hand. "This girl invaded my property for the 2nd time, and the animals have gone crazy. I've never seen anything like it." Arthur observed the cows with feigned admiration. "It really is strange, boss. In 15 years working here, I've never seen them act like this." He approached the circle of animals and noted how they remained calm and protective. "It's almost as if they're protecting the girl." "Protecting a thief," Josiah shouted. "This is what you get for being too soft with these people. They think they can do whatever they want." Rose stood up slowly, still keeping a protective hand on Haley's shoulder. She had known her husband long enough to know when he was losing control, and she knew she had to act fast to prevent a tragedy. "Josiah," she said in a firm but careful voice, "maybe we should think of another solution. The girl is clearly not a common criminal. She's a desperate child." "Solution?" Josiah laughed bitterly. "The solution is simple. She's going to learn that actions have consequences. I'm going to lock this girl in the barn until she understands she can't trespass on other people's property." Haley gasped in fear, clinging to Rose's skirt. The woman felt the small, trembling hand, and her resolve hardened. She glanced at Arthur, who immediately caught the silent message in her eyes. "Boss," Arthur said carefully, "maybe it would be better if I escorted the girl off the property. The cows are very agitated, and it could affect the milk production." It was a smart argument. Josiah always responded to matters that directly affected his profits. He looked around, noticing how the cows continued to moo and shift restlessly. "You might be right," he muttered, but then his expression hardened again. "But that doesn't solve the problem. If she gets away with it today, she'll be back tomorrow, and then others will come." Rose took a deep breath, knowing she was about to risk a great deal. What if we offered her a job? She could help in the kitchen, and in return, she would get food for herself and her brother. The silence that followed was tense. Josiah stared at Rose as if she had lost her mind. "Give a job to a child who stole from me? That's rewarding. Crime! It's solving the problem," Rose replied with more courage than she felt. "If she has an honest way to get food, she won't need to trespass." Haley looked at Rose with hope shining in her eyes. The possibility of working honestly, of not having to sneak around like a thief, was more than she had dared to dream. "It's an interesting idea," Arthur supported carefully, "and she could work under supervision. That way we'd be sure she wouldn't cause any trouble." Josiah looked at them suspiciously. He could feel he was being manipulated, but the logic of Rose's argument was hard to refute. If the girl were working on the ranch, she would be under his direct control. "And what would be her payment?" he asked sarcastically. "Gold? Silver?" "Food," Rose said simply. "1 meal a day for her and a ration to take to her brother. Nothing more. And if she steals something, if she causes trouble, then she'll be dismissed immediately." Rose assured him. The cows began to calm down gradually, as if they could sense the tension was easing. Haley remained silent, hardly daring to breathe as her future was being decided by adults who barely knew her. Josiah looked at the thin girl, then at the cows that still protectively surrounded her. Something about the whole situation bothered him deeply, but he couldn't quite identify what. "Very well," he said finally, his voice heavy with reluctance. "But on one condition." "The condition is simple," Josiah said, his cold smile making Haley instinctively recoil. "She will work, yes, but first, she needs to learn that crimes have consequences. 3 days locked in the barn to reflect on her actions. After that, if she still wants to work, she can start." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. "Josiah, she's just a child. 3 days locked up is too long for someone so small." "3 days or nothing," he replied firmly. "It's that or I call the sheriff on a thief. The choice is hers." Haley looked at Rose with pleading eyes, then at Arthur, who looked away in obvious discomfort. The cows around her began to stir again, as if they could sense the rising tension. One of them, the oldest in the herd, mooed loudly, a sound that seemed to carry all the indignation the humans present could not express. "I accept," Haley whispered, her voice barely audible. "If I can work and get food for Leo afterward, I accept." Rose closed her eyes, feeling a deep pain in her chest. She wanted to protest, to take Haley by the hand and lead her far away. And from there, but she knew it would only make things worse. Josiah was relentless when crossed. "Then it's settled," Josiah announced with clear satisfaction. "Arthur, take her to the barn and make sure it's locked up tight." Arthur hesitated for a moment. "Boss, she'll need water and food." "Water, yes. Food, just enough to keep her from dying. She needs to understand what real hardship is." Josiah's words echoed across the field like a sentence. Rose felt tears well in her eyes, but she could do nothing but watch as Arthur, with visible reluctance, extended a hand to Haley. "Come on, kid," he said gently. "I'll take you to a place where you can rest." Haley stood up slowly, her legs trembling. She looked one last time at the cows that had protected her and whispered, "Thank you." Then she followed Arthur towards the barn, located in the farthest part of the property. The barn was an old wooden structure used for storing hay and farm equipment. It had only one small window high up and a heavy wooden door that creaked ominously as Arthur opened it. "I'm sorry, Haley," Arthur muttered as he led her inside. "I'll bring you some water and a piece of bread in a few hours." Haley nodded, trying to be brave. "It's okay, Mr. Arthur. You're being kind." When the door closed and Haley heard the sound of the key turning in the lock, the reality of the situation hit her like a punch. She was alone, locked in a dark, damp space while Leo was at home, probably crying from hunger. But something extraordinary began to happen outside. The cows, which had watched Haley being led away, started moving towards the barn. It was not a casual movement. It was deliberate, determined. Within minutes, the entire herd had gathered around the building. They mooed incessantly, a deep, unsettling chorus that echoed throughout the ranch. Some began to push against the door with their heads, while others tried to knock down the side walls. Josiah, who had returned to the main house satisfied with his solution, came running out when he heard the noise. "What in God's name is going on now?" Arthur and Rose also ran to the barn, finding a scene that defied any rational explanation. Dozens of cows surrounded the building, all facing the door where Haley was trapped. Their moos were so loud and constant they could be heard for miles. "Make them stop," Josiah yelled over the din. "This is going to attract attention from the whole county." Arthur tried to shoo the cows away, but they refused to move. On the contrary, when he approached the barn door, they became more aggressive, pushing him back. "I've never seen anything like it," Rose murmured, watching the animals' behavior with a mixture of awe and astonishment. It's as if they know Haley is in danger. Inside the barn, Haley could hear the moos of her protectors. She approached the door and placed her hand on the rough wood. "I'm okay," she whispered, as if the animals could hear her. "Thank you for worrying about me." To everyone's surprise, the mooing subsided slightly when Haley spoke, but it didn't stop completely. It was as if the cows were sending a clear message. They would not leave while the girl was trapped. The noise was so intense that it began to attract the attention of people in the area. Curious neighbors appeared at the edges of the property, trying to understand what was causing such an uproar. Some of the ranch hands stopped their work to watch the inexplicable phenomenon. Josiah realized the situation was spiraling out of his control. The last thing he wanted was outside attention on his educational methods. His face turned red with anger and frustration. "This has to stop," he roared. "I will not tolerate this circus on my property." But the cows continued their protest, like loyal soldiers defending a just cause. And inside the dark barn, Haley drew strength from every moo, knowing she wasn't completely alone in the world. Haley's first day in the barn passed like an endless nightmare. The cows kept their constant vigil, taking turns like dedicated sentinels. Arthur managed to bring the girl water and a small piece of bread only when a few of the cows briefly moved away for water, and even then, it was a difficult operation. Rose couldn't sleep the first night. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the silhouettes of the animals around the barn, listening to their intermittent moos that sounded like the laments of lost souls. Her mother's heart was torn, and she knew she couldn't continue to passively watch this injustice. Meanwhile, in the small wooden shack in the settlement, Leo woke up on the second morning to find Haley not beside him. He had called for her all through the previous night, but his childish voice was lost in the silence of the empty house. When the sun rose and she still hadn't returned, the 3-year-old boy made a decision that would surprise any adult. With unsteady but determined steps, Leo left the house and began to walk down the dusty roads. His small feet were bare and already bleeding slightly by the time he reached the main road, but his worry for his sister was greater than any physical discomfort. "Haley! Haley!" he cried as he walked, his tears leaving clean streaks on his dirty cheeks. A few neighbors tried to stop him, but Leo dodged them with the desperate agility of a panicked child. Miss Connie was the first to realize something was truly wrong. She had seen Haley leave the morning before, but hadn't seen a return. When she saw Leo walking alone down the road, her grandmotherly heart clenched. "Leo, sweetheart, where's your sister?" she asked, kneeling in front of the boy. "Haley went to get milk and didn't come back," Leo sobbed. "I'm hungry and she always comes back. Always." Miss Connie felt a shiver of foreboding. She knew the stories about Josiah Vance and his cruelty towards the poor people of the county. If Haley had tried to get milk from his ranch, "I'll help you look for your sister," she said gently, trying to pick Leo up. But the boy struggled, wanting to continue searching on his own. "I know where she is," he insisted with surprising determination for a child. "She went where the pretty cows live." Miss Connie understood immediately. Josiah's ranch was the only place in the area where the cows were well cared for and visibly healthy. If Haley had gone there. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Rose made a decision that would change everything. She could no longer passively watch Haley suffer. During breakfast, when Josiah commented with satisfaction that the little thief should be learning her lesson by now, something inside Rose snapped. "I'm taking food to the girl," she announced, standing up from the table. "You'll do no such thing," Josiah replied coldly. "She needs to learn that actions have consequences." "She is a child, Josiah, an orphan child taking care of a younger brother. So what?" he snarled. "That doesn't give her the right to steal what's mine." Rose looked at the man she had been married to for 15 years and for the first time saw him for who he truly was, a man who had completely lost his humanity in the name of greed. "If you don't let me feed that child properly, I will go to the authorities myself," she said, with a firmness that surprised them both. Josiah stood up abruptly, his chair screeching on the floor. "You wouldn't dare defy me like that." "Try and stop me," Rose retorted, her eyes flashing with determination. It was at this tense moment that they heard voices outside. Arthur was talking to someone at the ranch gates, and his voice sounded concerned. Josiah went to the window and saw a sight that made his blood boil. Miss Connie was standing at the gates, holding the hand of a little blonde boy who couldn't have been more than 3. "That's the thief's brother," he muttered angrily. "Now, they're coming in packs." Rose ran to the window and saw Leo for the first time. The boy was even smaller and more fragile than Haley, his blue eyes red from crying. She felt her heart shatter completely. "Please, sir," Miss Connie was saying to Arthur, "this boy is looking for his sister. She left yesterday and hasn't come back. He's desperate." Arthur looked at Leo and saw Haley's reflection. The same determination, the same vulnerability, the same purity that touched the soul of anyone with a shred of humanity. "Haley! I know Haley's here!" Leo suddenly shouted, trying to squeeze through the bars of the gate. "Haley, I'm here! I came to get you!" The cows, which had slightly quieted their mooing during the morning, erupted into a deafening chorus when they heard Leo's voice. It was as if they recognized the connection between the two children and intensified their protest. In the barn, Haley heard the familiar voice and felt her heart nearly stop. "Leo!" she screamed, pounding on the wooden door. "Leo, I'm here!" The meeting of the siblings' voices, separated by only a few hundred yards but prevented from reuniting, created a heartbreaking scene. Leo began to cry even louder, trying to climb the gate to get to his sister. Josiah watched it all with a mixture of anger and something he couldn't identify. For the first time in years, a pang of what might have been conscience pricked his heart, but he quickly suppressed it. "Get that boy out of here," he ordered Arthur over the intercom. "And if anyone asks about the girl, tell them you don't know anything." But his words were nearly drowned out by the mooing of the cows and the cries of Leo, which echoed across the ranch like a lament reaching for the heavens. The scene at the ranch gates was growing increasingly tense. Leo clung to the iron bars, like a tiny prisoner trying to escape, his cries for Haley echoing across the fields. Miss Connie tried to comfort him, but her own tears betrayed her composure. "Please, Mr. Arthur," she pleaded with the foreman. "I've known this family since they were born. They're good children, orphans trying to survive. If the girl is here, for the love of God, let her little brother see her." Arthur looked at Leo and felt his heart break. The boy was visibly malnourished, his clothes hanging on his small, thin body like rags on a scarecrow. His blue eyes shone with tears, but also with a determination that was incredibly reminiscent of Haley. "I'd like to help, Miss Connie," Arthur said quietly, glancing nervously toward the main house. But the boss was very clear in his orders. It was then that Rose appeared, running down the path, carrying a basket of food. She had decided to openly defy Josiah, and nothing was going to stop her from feeding Haley properly. "Rose!" Arthur called, relieved to see a friendly face. "What are you doing?" "I'm taking food to Haley," she replied firmly, but she stopped short when she saw Leo clinging to the bars. The impact of seeing the little brother was like a punch to the gut. Leo looked at Rose with his big, hopeful eyes. "Do you know where my Haley is, ma'am? She went to get milk and didn't come back. I'm so hungry, and she always takes care of me." Rose knelt in front of the gate, her tears falling freely. "She's here, sweetie. Your sister is here, and I'm going to make sure she's okay." "Can I see her? Please?" Leo stretched his small hands through the bars, trying to touch Rose. It was at that moment that Josiah appeared, his face twisted with rage. "Rose, get back to the house immediately, and you, Arthur, get these people off my property now." "I'm not going anywhere," Rose said, standing up to face her husband. "This child needs to see his sister. They only have each other in this world." "They are not our problem," Josiah bellowed. "And if you take one more step towards that barn, you can find another place to live." The threat hung in the air like a thunderclap, but Rose didn't flinch. Instead, she took 2 steps towards the barn, openly challenging her husband's authority. The cows, having watched the whole argument, began to move again. This time, they didn't just surround the barn. They began to spread out across the ranch, creating obstacles at strategic points. Some blocked the path to the water troughs, others positioned themselves in front of the feed stores. What in the devil is wrong with these animals? Josiah yelled, watching his cows behave in a completely anomalous way. Arthur watched the cattle's behavior with growing admiration. In his 15 years on the ranch, he had learned to read the animals, and what he was seeing was a primitive but effective form of protest. The cows were deliberately sabotaging the ranch's operations. "They're protesting, boss," he said calmly. "I've never seen anything like it, but that's what's happening. They're protesting what's being done to the girl." "Animals don't protest," Josiah snarled, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "They don't have the conscience for it." Leo, seeing the cow's agitation, stopped crying for a moment. With a child's natural intuition, he realized the animals were trying to help his sister. "The cows want to help Haley too," he said with childish wonder. "They're pretty and good." Miss Connie watched the scene with growing astonishment. In her 70 years, she had never witnessed anything like it. It was as if the animals themselves were taking sides in the dispute between justice and cruelty. Inside the barn, Haley could hear everything that was happening. Leo's voice made her cry and smile at the same time. Cry because he was suffering. Smile because she knew he was safe and had made it this far. Her little brother's courage filled her with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'm okay, Leo," she shouted through the door. "Haley's okay. You have to be brave." Haley's voice triggered a new explosion of moos from the cows. They became even more agitated, some beginning to push over equipment and knock down smaller fences. Josiah was completely losing control of the situation. His ranch hands began to gather around the gates, curious about what was causing so much commotion. Some neighbors also appeared, drawn by the unusual sounds coming from the normally quiet ranch. "This has to stop," Josiah roared. "Arthur, get some men and get these cows back to normal. Use force if you have to." Arthur hesitated. Using force against agitated animals was dangerous, especially when they were acting so cohesively. Besides, something in his conscience rebelled against the idea of hurting the creatures that were clearly trying to protect an innocent child. "Boss, I think it would be better if we tried to calm the situation another way," he suggested carefully. "How?" Josiah asked sarcastically. "By serving the cows tea?" It was Rose who answered, her voice firm and clear. "By freeing Haley." The cowed silence that followed was heavy with tension. Everyone present, Arthur, Miss Connie, the ranch hands who had gathered, even Leo, looked at Josiah, waiting for his response. The cows also seemed to sense the crucial moment, slightly quieting their moos, as if they too were awaiting a decision. Josiah looked around, seeing all eyes fixed on him, and for the first time in years, he felt truly cornered. As the tension mounted at the ranch gates, a well-known figure in the area approached on the dusty road. Margaret Sutton, a 68-year-old, retired schoolteacher, had heard the incessant mooing from her home, situated 2 miles from Josiah's property. Something about the sound deeply unsettled her. Margaret had dedicated 40 years of her life to educating the poor children of the region. Her sharp maternal instinct had never failed her, and right now it was screaming that something was terribly wrong. She grabbed her wooden cane and decided to investigate personally. When she arrived at the ranch gates, Margaret found a scene that confirmed her worst fears. A small, clearly malnourished boy was clinging to the bars, crying for his sister, while an elderly woman tried to console him. The cows were mooing incessantly, and there was a general unrest that suggested a crisis in progress. "Miss Connie," Margaret called out, recognizing the neighbor. "What on earth is happening here?" Connie turned, relieved to see a friendly face. "Miss Margaret, I'm so glad you came. This little boy is looking for his sister. She disappeared yesterday, and he's sure she's here at the ranch." Margaret looked at Leo and immediately recognized the signs of a child in extreme need. Her experienced eyes took in every detail: the obvious malnutrition, the inadequate clothing, but above all, the intelligence and determination that shone in his blue eyes. "What's your name, dear?" she asked gently, kneeling with some difficulty in front of the boy. "Leo," he answered between sobs. "My Haley's in there, I know she is. She went to get milk for me and didn't come back." Margaret felt a familiar chill, the same one she felt whenever she encountered injustice against children. During her years as a teacher, she had seen many cases of families destroyed by poverty, but she had always fought to protect her students. "And where do you live, Leo? Who takes care of you besides your sister?" "Just Haley," Leo replied with devastating simplicity. "Mommy and Daddy went to heaven, and now it's just us." At that moment, Rose approached the gates, still carrying the food basket. When she saw Margaret, an expression of relief crossed her face. The teacher was respected throughout the county, and her presence could make a difference. "Miss Sutton," Rose said urgently, "this boy's sister has been locked in the barn for 2 days. My husband caught her trying to milk a cow to feed her little brother." Margaret felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. "Locked in a barn? A child?" "She's only 7, Rose continued, her tears falling freely. "She's an orphan, taking care of this little boy all by herself. She was desperate for food." Margaret's expression hardened. In her years as an educator, she had dealt with many difficult cases, but the imprisonment of a child crossed every acceptable line. "Where is your husband?" she asked in a firm voice. As if summoned, Josiah appeared on the path, his face red with rage at seeing yet another intruder on his property. "What are all these people doing here?" he bellowed. "This is private property." Margaret rose slowly, leaning on her cane. Despite her age, there was a natural dignity in her posture that commanded respect. "Mr. Vance," she said in a calm but authoritative voice, "I'm Margaret Sutton, a retired teacher. I need to speak with you about a very serious matter." "I have nothing to talk about with anyone," Josiah answered brusquely, "and I want all of you off my property immediately." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Margaret replied. "I'm told there is a child locked in a barn here. That, if true, constitutes a crime against a minor." Josiah became visibly uncomfortable. Margaret's reputation in the county was impeccable, and she had connections with various local authorities. "The girl was trespassing," he said defensively. "She was stealing milk from my cows. She needs to learn that actions have consequences." "A 7-year-old orphan trying to feed her 3-year-old brother?" Margaret asked, her voice laced with controlled outrage. "And your solution was to lock her in a barn?" The cows, as if sensing the shift in dynamics, intensified their mooing. It was as if they recognized an ally in Margaret in the fight for justice. Leo, who had been watching the conversation with remarkable attention for his age, walked over to Margaret and took her free hand. "Can you help my Haley, ma'am?" he asked, hope shining in his eyes. Margaret looked at the brave little boy who had walked for miles to find his sister, and she felt her resolve harden even further. "Yes, dear," she said firmly. "I am going to help your sister." Then, turning to Josiah with all the authority 4 decades of teaching had given her, she declared, "Mr. Vance, I demand to see this child immediately, and if she is not in a suitable condition, the proper authorities will be notified this very day." Josiah realized the situation had escalated to an entirely new level. Margaret Sutton was not a curious neighbor or an employee he could intimidate. She was a respected figure in the community, with real influence. The cows mooed even louder, as if in approval of the teacher's intervention. And for the first time since it all began, Josiah felt he was irreversibly losing control of the situation. Josiah found himself in an impossible position. Margaret Sutton's presence had completely changed the game. He knew that if he refused to show them Haley, the teacher would do exactly as she had promised. She would call the authorities. On the other hand, if he revealed the girl's condition after 2 days locked in a dark, damp barn, he would face even worse consequences. "Very well," he said finally, his voice thick with reluctance. "But I want it to be clear that I was only trying to teach a young thief a lesson." Margaret didn't reply, but the look she gave Josiah could have melted steel. She followed the group towards the barn, Leo scurrying at her side with growing anxiety. The cows parted slightly as the group approached, but remained vigilant, their eyes fixed on every move. It was as if they knew this was the crucial moment they had been waiting for. Arthur reached the barn door first, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled for the key. When he finally managed to turn the lock, the sound of the door creaking open echoed across the fields like a collective sigh of relief. Sunlight streamed into the dark barn, revealing a scene that broke the hearts of everyone present. Haley was sitting in a corner, hugging her knees, visibly thinner than 2 days before. Her large eyes were unfocused, and she blinked several times, trying to adjust to the sudden brightness. "Haley!" Leo cried, running into the barn and throwing himself into his sister's arms. Haley hugged him with desperate strength, her tears falling like rain as she felt her little brother's small, thin body against hers. "Leo, my love, are you okay? How did you get here?" "I came to get you," Leo said proudly, though his voice was choked with emotion. "I knew you were here with the pretty cows." Margaret entered the barn and quickly assessed the conditions. The space was damp, dark, and clearly unfit to house a child. There was only a bucket of water, almost empty, and a few pieces of stale bread on the floor. "My God," she murmured, kneeling beside the children. "Haley, is that your name? How are you feeling, dear?" Haley looked at the unknown woman with gratitude shining in her eyes. "I'm okay, Mom. I just missed Leo." But Margaret could see she was not okay. The girl was clearly dehydrated and weak, her lips chapped and her skin far too pale. Rose rushed into the barn carrying her basket and immediately began distributing food to the children. "Eat slowly," she instructed gently. "You need to eat properly." Josiah remained at the entrance of the barn, growing more uncomfortable as he watched the scene. For the first time, seeing the 2 children reunited, so small, so vulnerable, so clearly in need, something in his hardened heart began to stir. "Haley," Margaret said softly, "can you tell me what happened? Why did you come to the ranch?" Haley glanced nervously at Josiah, then back at Margaret. In a weak but clear voice, she told her story, Leo's hunger, her desperate decision to try to get milk, how the cows seemed to understand her need. "I know it was wrong to trespass on the gentleman's property," she said, looking at Josiah, "but I didn't know what else to do. Leo was crying from hunger, and I'm the only person he has in the world. Margaret felt tears burn her eyes. In 40 years of dealing with vulnerable children, she had learned to recognize genuine sincerity, and every word from Haley rang with truth. "And you, Mr. Vance," Margaret turned to Josiah, "thought it was appropriate to lock a 7-year-old child in a barn for 2 days. Josiah tried to maintain his defensive posture, but his words came out weaker and weaker. She needed to learn that you can't just take what belongs to others. She is a child, Margaret said with growing firmness, an orphan child trying to care for a younger brother, and instead of helping her, you punished her as if she were an adult criminal. The cows outside began to moo again, but this time the sound was different, less agitated, more hopeful, as if they knew justice was finally being served. Leo, who had finished a piece of bread, looked at Josiah with childlike curiosity. "Why did you lock up my Haley? She only wanted to help. Need not be hungry." Leo's simple, direct question hit Josiah like a physical blow. Seen through the innocent eyes of the child, his actions seemed even more cruel and unjustifiable. Margaret watched Josiah's expression and realized something was shifting. There was a crack in his armor of coldness, a fissure through which humanity could begin to emerge. "What we are going to do now is ensure these children are properly cared for," she declared. "And we're going to have a serious conversation about how we treat vulnerable children in our community." Haley held Leo's hand and looked at all the adults around her. For the first time in days, she felt truly safe, protected not just by the kind cows, but by people who genuinely cared for her well-being. Josiah remained silent, but something in his expression had changed irrevocably. The group walked out of the barn in a heavy silence, Haley leaning on Rose for support, Leo holding tightly to her hand. The cows approached slowly, as if to personally verify that their protected one was safe. One of them, the oldest in the herd, stretched out its head and gently nuzzled Haley's arm. "Thank you," Haley whispered to the animals, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of me." Margaret watched the interaction with growing admiration. In all her years, she had never witnessed such a connection between children and animals. It was as if the cows had recognized Haley's purity and need, responding with an instinctive protection that defied explanation. Josiah walked behind the group, his mind in turmoil. Leo's simple question echoed in his thoughts. "Why did you lock up my Haley?" For the first time in decades, he was being forced to confront his own actions through the eyes of innocence. When they neared the main house, Margaret stopped and turned to face Josiah. "Mr. Vance, I need to know what your intentions are now. These children need immediate care and a long-term solution." Josiah opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by the sound of cars approaching on the dirt road. 3 vehicles kicked up clouds of dust as they headed for the ranch gates. "Who are those people?" Josiah asked, a note of alarm growing in his voice. Margaret smiled with satisfaction. "I made a few calls before I came here. I thought it would be prudent to have official witnesses for this situation." The cars stopped at the gates, and several people got out. Among them, Josiah recognized with growing horror the local sheriff, a social worker from the county, and the priest from the town church. Margaret had mobilized a full-blown investigation committee. "Miss Margaret," Sheriff Vince Carter greeted her respectfully, "we received your call. Where are the children in question?" Haley instinctively hid behind Rose, intimidated by the presence of so many unknown adults. Leo, however, bravely approached the group. "Did you come to help my Haley?" he asked with hope. The social worker, a young woman named Carla, knelt in front of Leo. "Yes, sweetie, we came to make sure you and your sister are safe." Josiah felt panic rise in his chest. The situation had completely escaped his control. What had started as a simple correction of a thieving child had turned into an official investigation. "Sheriff," he began, trying to maintain his composure, "there's been a misunderstanding. The girl trespassed on my property, and I was just locking a 7-year-old child in a barn for 2 days," Margaret interrupted coldly. "Without adequate food, sufficient water, or medical care. Father Michael, a kind man of 60, who knew all the families in the area, approached Haley gently. 'My child, are you all right? Do you need any medical attention?' Haley nodded shyly. She knew the priest by sight, as he sometimes visited the poor families in the area, bringing food and words of comfort. "She is visibly malnourished and dehydrated," Rose said, her voice filled with outrage. "I tried to feed her properly, but my husband forbade it." Carla, the social worker, took notes in her pad as she observed the children. Her professional eye immediately recognized the signs of extreme vulnerability. "Mr. Vance," Sheriff Carter addressed Josiah seriously, "I need to understand exactly what happened here. We received a report of child endangerment." It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. The cows, which had remained relatively calm since Haley's release, began to move toward the group of authorities. But it was not an aggressive movement. It was almost as if they were trying to bear witness. The oldest cow approached the sheriff and mooed once, clearly, as if trying to communicate. Other cows did the same, creating a chorus of voices that seemed to support Haley's version of the story. "I've never seen anything like it," the sheriff murmured, watching the animals' behavior with astonishment. Father Michael smiled gently. "Animals sometimes see the truth more clearly than we humans do. They recognized this child's need and responded with compassion." Josiah watched the whole scene with growing despair. His reputation in the county, built over decades, was crumbling before his eyes. But more than that, something inside him was breaking, the shield of coldness he had built around his heart. He started, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. "I didn't want it to come to this." Margaret looked him directly in the eye. "Then what did you want, Josiah? What did you hope to achieve by imprisoning an orphan child who was trying to feed her starving brother?" The question hung in the silence that followed. All the authorities, Rose, Arthur, even the cows, seemed to await his answer. Haley and Leo looked at him with their big, innocent eyes, without hatred, only curiosity as to why an adult would do something so cruel. Josiah opened his mouth several times, trying to find a justification, an explanation that made sense. But for the first time in his adult life, he couldn't form words to defend his actions. The silence stretched on, heavy and filled with expectation, as everyone waited for an answer that could determine not only the children's fate, but the very soul of Josiah Vance. The silence stretched for long seconds until Josiah finally broke. His legs trembled, and he sat down heavily on a nearby log, burying his face in his hands. When he looked up, tears were streaming down his cheeks, the first he had shed in over 20 years. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice broken. "I don't know what I was trying to achieve. I only saw trespassers, thieves. I didn't see children." Haley let go of Leo's hand and, to everyone's surprise, slowly approached Josiah. Her natural compassion, uncorrupted by the cruelty she had suffered, guided her. "Were you scared?" she asked in her sweet, childish voice. "When I'm scared, sometimes I get angry too." Haley's simple question was like a spear straight to Josiah's heart. He looked at the thin girl who had spent 2 days locked up because of him, and saw in her a wisdom he had lost decades ago. "Yes," he admitted, looking into Haley's large eyes. "I was scared. Scared of losing what I've built. Scared that people would think I was weak if I was kind." Rose watched her husband with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she was seeing the man she had married, not the cold tyrant he had become. but the vulnerable human being beneath all that armor. Sheriff Carter, who had witnessed many confessions in his career, recognized the moment of genuine remorse. "Mr. Vance, what you did was serious, but if there's sincere regret and a willingness to make amends—" "I want to make amends," Josiah said quickly, standing up and looking at Haley and Leo. "I want to do the right thing. For the first time in years, I truly want to do the right thing." Carla, the social worker, stepped forward. "The children need a family, constant care. They can't continue living alone." "They can stay with us," Rose said immediately, looking at Arthur, who nodded vigorously in agreement. "We've always wanted children. We can care for them as if they were our own." Haley looked at Rose with gratitude shining in her eyes, but then she turned to Josiah. "And you? What do you want?" The question caught Josiah off guard. No one had asked him what he wanted in terms of kindness for so long that he had forgotten he had a choice. "I want—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I want you to be happy. I want you to never be hungry again. I want to be better than I was." Leo, who had been watching the whole conversation, approached Josiah. "Can you play with me and Haley sometimes? I don't have a daddy to play with." Leo's innocent question completely shattered Josiah's last barriers. He knelt in front of the boy, his tears falling freely. "If you'll let me," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I would very much like to learn how to be a grandfather to you." Father Michael smiled, recognizing the miracle of human transformation. "The ranch could become something different," he suggested gently. "A place where families in need can work and live with dignity." Josiah looked around his property with new eyes. "Yes," he said slowly. "There could be homes for families, community gardens, a place where no one goes hungry." Margaret watched the transformation with admiration. In 40 years of dealing with people, she had learned to recognize genuine change and what she was seeing in Josiah was real. "The authorities will need to monitor the situation," the sheriff said formally. "But if there's a real commitment to change—" "There is," Josiah said firmly. "I promise before all of you and before these children that I will dedicate the rest of my life to repairing the harm I've done." The cows, as if they could sense the change in the air, began to calm down completely. Their moos became softer, almost melodic, as if they were celebrating the victory of compassion over cruelty. Haley approached one of the cows and petted it gently. "Thank you for protecting me," she whispered. "You are the best friends a girl could have." Rose approached Haley and Leo. "Do you want to come home with us? We have a room that can be yours, and I promise you will never be hungry again." Haley looked at Leo, who nodded enthusiastically. "Can we? Please, Haley." "Yes," Haley said, smiling for the first time in days. "We can." Arthur, who had remained silent throughout the scene, finally spoke. "Boss," he said to Josiah, "I think this ranch is going to become a very special place." Josiah looked at his loyal foreman and smiled through his tears. "It already is a special place, Arthur. I just needed 2 brave children and some wise cows to teach me that." As the group walked toward the main house, Haley held Leo's hand in one of hers and Rose's in the other. The cows accompanied them for a short distance, like an honor guard, before returning peacefully to their pastures. For the first time in weeks, Haley and Leo didn't feel hungry. For the first time in years, Josiah felt peace. And for the first time in the ranch's history, the property was truly prosperous, not just in material wealth, but in love, compassion, and hope. 6 months had passed since that transformative day, and Josiah Vance's ranch was unrecognizable. Where once there were only fields geared for profit, Now, small, colorful houses dotted the landscape, home to 15 needy families from the area. Community gardens flourished beside the pastures, and the sound of children playing echoed through the fields that had once known only silence and work. Haley, now 8, ran through the fields with Leo, their crystal-clear laughter filling the morning air. She had gained weight. Her hair shone with health, and her large eyes no longer carried the weight of premature adult responsibility. Leo, at 4, had blossomed into a vibrant, curious child who chased butterflies and asked endless questions about everything he saw. "Haley! Haley!" Leo shouted excitedly, pointing to the cows grazing peacefully. "Will they like the present we made?" Haley smiled, holding up a crown of flowers they had woven together. "I'm sure they will, Leo. They always like it when we make pretty things for them." The children approached the herd, and the oldest cow, the one that had first protected Haley, drew near. Haley placed the flower crown around the animal's neck, and it mooed softly, as if in thanks. "You saved our lives," Haley whispered, stroking its soft muzzle. "We'll never forget that you protected us when we needed it most." Across the field, Rose watched the scene with tears of joy in her eyes. She had found in motherhood the purpose she had always sought, and Haley and Leo had filled the void in her heart with unconditional love. Arthur approached, carrying tools after a day's work on the new school they were building on the property. "How are our little ones today?" he asked, wrapping Rose in an affectionate hug. "Perfect, as always," Rose replied, watching the children interact with the cows. Haley helped serve lunch to the families today, and Leo taught the words he learned to the younger children. Josiah appeared, walking slowly across the field, leaning on a cane. At 53, he had developed an arthritis that limited his movement, but his face radiated a peace he had never before possessed. The children ran towards him. "Grandpa Josiah!" Leo shouted, throwing himself into the arms of the man who had once been his tormentor. "Look what we made for the cows!" Josiah knelt with difficulty, hugging the boy with genuine tenderness. "It's beautiful, my boy. I'm sure they were very happy." Haley approached more shyly, still carrying remnants of the traumatic experience, but with growing confidence. "Grandpa Josiah, Mrs. Maria said her daughter is coming tomorrow with her grandkids. Can we show them the ranch?" "Of course you can." "My girl," Josiah replied, stroking Haley's hair, "you two are the best guides this ranch could have." In the distance, Margaret Sutton walked the property alongside Sheriff Carter and Carla, the social worker. They were making their monthly follow-up visit, but what they had found surpassed all expectations. "It's extraordinary," Carla murmured, watching the families working harmoniously in the fields and gardens. "In 20 years on the job, I've never seen such a complete transformation." "The power of forgiveness," Margaret observed wisely. "When an innocent child forgives an adult who hurt them, something magical happens. Not only does the child heal, but the adult discovers their lost humanity." The sheriff nodded in agreement. "The crime reports in the county have dropped dramatically. Since the ranch became this community hub, it's as if kindness is contagious." In the main house, which now served as a community center and school, Father Michael was leading an adult literacy class. Miss Connie, now 71, had moved to the ranch and helped care for the younger children while their parents worked. "Life has a curious way of teaching us lessons," Father Michael told his students. "Sometimes it's the children who show us the way back home." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the entire community gathered for the daily communal dinner. It had become a tradition where all the families shared a meal and the day's experiences. Haley helped serve the food, her movements confident and cheerful. She was no longer the desperate girl who snuck among the cows. She was a loved, safe, and thriving child who had found her place in the world. Leo sat next to Josiah, chattering, excitedly about his day's adventures. The man listened with full attention, asking questions and smiling with a genuine joy that radiated from within. "Grandpa Josiah," Leo said suddenly, "why were you sad before you met us?" The unexpected question made Josiah pause. He looked around the table, seeing all the faces lit by joy and a sense of community, then looked out at the cows grazing peacefully in the nearby fields. "Because I had forgotten that the most important thing in life isn't what we have, but how we take care of one another," he answered with simplicity. "You two reminded me of that." Haley came over and gave Josiah a spontaneous hug. "We're glad you remembered, Grandpa Josiah. Now we're one big, happy family." When night fell completely, Haley and Leo climbed onto their favorite cows for one last ride before bed. The image of the two children riding peacefully through the fields, their laughter echoing under the starry sky, was a perfect symbol of the transformation that had occurred. Josiah watched from a distance, remembering the cruel man he had been just 6 months before. The journey from darkness to light had been painful, but necessary. He had lost his coldness, but gained a family. He had lost his isolation, but gained a community. He had lost his fear, but gained love. The cows drew near the children as they always did, protective and affectionate, reminding everyone that compassion exists in all creatures. Sometimes it just needs to be awakened by pure hearts that believe in the best of every being. Under the brilliant stars, on the ranch that had been transformed from a place of cruelty into a beacon of hope, Haley and Leo continued to play, protected by the love of a chosen family and the silent wisdom of animals who had taught humans the true meaning of protection and care.